Hi guys, Brian from Boas here. If you're like most boa hobbyists, you start out with a single boa constrictor, but when you realize how cool these animals are to keep as pets, you ultimately want to get another one. So you add another one to your collection, and then you see all the diversity of all these really cool different locality boas and morph boas, and you end up adding a few more. And so ultimately you're working on building a boa collection. So today I wanted to talk about some of the things you should consider, hopefully before or certainly when you're building up your boa collection. I'm also going to talk about some of the specific places that you can go in order to acquire boa constrictors and some of the pros and cons of each of these places. If you like this video, please subscribe to the Brian Boas YouTube channel for more videos on all aspects of keeping and breeding boas in captivity. And of course, as in all my videos, I'm going to take out some of my favorite boas for you to enjoy, such as this 2017 Holdback Tarahumara Mountain Dwarf Boa. So the first thing that you want to worry about when thinking about your boa acquisition is what types of boas that you want to include in your collection. And so I know that boas are a small subgroup of the whole reptile hobby. You know, there's numerous other snakes and lizards and tortoises and a huge variety of different reptiles. But within boas, you probably want to focus even more selectively. Have your own specific niche. For example, if you're in locality boas, you may want to focus on a certain subspecies such as longicauda or saboge. You may also want to focus on a certain boas from a certain country, for example, boas from Peru or Venezuela or from Mexico. And the Tarahumara are the only Mexican boa that I have right now. But as I mentioned in several of my other videos, these are one of my all-time favorite locality boas. And there's a number of other Mexican boas which I don't have, but they look like they're really cool animals to work with. The Mexican boas on the whole are smaller than most other boas. They're dwarf or semi-dwarf. They also have in some cases, very easy and straightforward husbandry requirements. They're very hardy as a whole, and they have less environmentally sensitive than some other localities like the true red-tailed boas, where you have to really maintain a very precise environmental conditions. In addition, they're beautiful to look at, and they're a joy to handle. You can see this animal is just kind of hanging out. You know, he's not trying to get away or bite me. He's also not squeezing my hand like, you know, certain other boas. They just squeeze and squeeze until you lose circulation in your fingers. But you see this guy is kind of nice and mellow and just kind of hanging out. If you decide to go into the morph side of breeding boas, you probably want to pick just a few different genes and acquire animals that are carrying those genes. For example, you may want to have animals which are containing the IMG, the hypo, the jungle, and the VPIT positive albino gene, such as this is a VPIT positive albino. You want to think about whether the genes are incomplete dominant or simple dominant recessives, because this is going to influence the types of animals that are going to be made possible by breeding these animals together. For example, the VPIT positive is a simple recessive trait. So you might want to acquire visuals of incomplete dominant genes like the IMG jungle that are containing a copy of the VPIT positive in the heterozygous state. And then you can, down the line, you can combine these animals together to get different combinations. Just a word about breeding animals. You really want to think about whether you want to breed or not. And the hobby in the last couple decades has gone more and more towards breeding. And you know, I'll probably release a video at some point down the line with my thoughts on this. But you don't have to breed boas. Breeding boas isn't and shouldn't be for everybody. If you want to just collect them or just have a few examples, this is perfectly fine. Don't feel any pressure to breed boas. A lot of people getting into boa breeding for all the wrong reasons, and usually doesn't end too well. So that being said, if you are going to breed boas, you really want to think carefully about the types of boas you're working with and whether it makes sense to breed them. there are quite a few different more common morph boas and mixed locality boas, for example, that don't really have that much of a commercial value. Hobbyists generally don't really want these animals, especially when you're talking about the pure locality folks. They really don't want for example, crossbreed between a true red-tailed boa and a common boa. So really think twice about whether you should be breeding these animals. And also, if you are going to be breeding the animals, keep in mind it might take you months or even years to find homes for them. So you should realize that you're going to have to provide homes or provide proper care for all of these boas until they're able to find a home. So really think twice about this. And if you think that you're working with an animal that isn't going to be really all that attractive for hobbyists to want to add to their collection, it really doesn't make sense to try to be breeding these animals. So another piece of advice is that you want to get the best quality boas that you can find to add to your collection. Boas can live, as you know, for up to several decades, so you might have the animal for a very long time. And also, if the animal is going to breed, you want the highest quality animal to form the basis of your breeding stock. That being said, you don't need to go overboard and obsess about the absolute best boa ever to add to your collection. The truth is there's a huge number of really, really nice boas out there. As I've said before, I think we're really lucky to be living in a time with such a wealth of great boas that are available to the average hobbyist. There's a misconception that among some people that there's this secret society of boa breeders, and they keep all of the really, really nice boas to themselves. And in order to add these boas to your breeding group, you need to know somebody, and there's a lot of hush-hush. The truth is, there's a lot of really nice boas out there, as I've said. So this is a 2014 true red-tailed boa, a Suriname BCC. And this was a holdback from my first litter of true red-tails. And both of the parents of this animal were nice animals. I would say they weren't quite as nice as she is. She really combines the best of both the father and the mother. But I didn't know anybody. I just found some animals online on one of the online classifieds, and I had been looking for a while, and they looked like they were really nice animals, and the breeders seemed like they were cool people to deal with, and so I got them. And as I mentioned, you can have litters that actually some of the babies will look nicer than both of the mother and the father. So if you see a really nice boa and you've been doing your homework, by all means go for it if it's the boa you want. Don't worry that there might be someone out there that might be a little bit nicer, and it's just I think some people have these unrealistic expectations and they don't really know what they're looking for. Another thing I find kind of curious is that people will often grade their litters. They'll have different prices for different offspring based on their quality or desirability. And I do understand that there is some variability between litters, especially for certain types of boas like the true red tails. However, I think it gets kind of blown out of proportion. So I've seen people that have these litters, and the babies, to me, they all look really nice in the pictures, but they're anywhere from like $200 up to like $1,200. And I look at the $200 one and the $1,200 one, and I just can't see the difference. In some cases, I think the less expensive boas are actually nicer. So, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I used to, for my litters, I would take pictures of all my babies and I'd share them with friends, and I would ask my friends to grade them, list them in order of preference, which is the best quality, the second best, third best, etc. And we would always come up with different estimates. So what one person thought was the nicest boa, another one would grade as a kind of mediocre boa, kind of in the middle. But there was never really any consensus. And I think a lot of it has to do more with the quality of the picture than the boa itself. The boa just looked good in that picture, or the boa was not having a good day and it didn't have a good picture, so it doesn't look as good, etc. You know, another thing that kind of is interesting to me is with my litters, often I'll sell a bunch right when they go on sale, and then I'll have a few that don't get bought, and then there's a lag of a few months, and someone contacts me wanting a boa, and I tell them what I have, and they say, well, but these are the rejects, these are the ones that didn't get picked. And it's really ridiculous, because a lot of these boas are just as nice, if not nicer, than the ones that got picked. So just some things to consider when you're looking for boas. If you see a boa that looks nice and you've done your homework, as I mentioned, you can probably feel okay about buying it, that there's not going to be a better one that's going to come as soon as you buy the one that you just bought. I just grabbed another boa to look at. This is a 2017 female Moran jungle boa, one of my favorite morph boas. But for the next part of the video, I wanted to talk about some specific places that you can go to get boas. And the first are the online classified sites that sell boas. And since the advent of the internet, there's been an explosion in the availability of boas. And there's actually 3 different classified sites online. So the first is called faunaclassifieds.com. And this, I believe, is the oldest classified site online. And they have lists of boas as well as various other reptiles. It doesn't have the best search function. I mean, you can do searches, but it's not that powerful. And the other issue, or the other downside with Fauna, is that they have ads that don't ever get deleted. And in some cases, I've seen people asking about a certain snake if it's for sale, and the ad is from 2010. So obviously it was sold many years ago. Fauna Classifieds also has a variety of forums, and one of the most enlightening forums that they had was called the Board of Inquiry, or BOI. And at the Board of Inquiry, people could put reviews about breeders or snake sellers that they did business with, and a lot of the reviews were really positive. So you could go there and you could read the positive reviews, and you could feel good about doing a transaction with someone you didn't know. Some of them were quite negative, so people would put negative experiences on there. Often dozens and even hundreds of people would chime in about their opinion. So it became kind of like a soap opera. And often there were some not so nice or not so accurate things that were said about people. And I think that Fauna Classifieds has actually stopped the Board of Inquiry. They either stopped it altogether, or you need to have like a subscription, which few people have. So like, I'm not available to see the Board of Inquiry anymore, which is unfortunate, because as I said, I did find it useful for seeing about what other people had experiences with certain breeders. So that's Fauna. Next we have kingsnake.com, and Kingsnake has also been around quite a while. It's fairly similar to Fauna. They have some forums, and they have some articles that you can read, which some of them are really good. And then they have a list of the boas that are for sale. Although the ads expire after a certain time. They don't just go on indefinitely like at Fauna. And then finally, the most recent reptile classifieds is called morphmarket.com. And Morph Market has only been around a few years, and the user experience is actually much better than Kingsnake or Fauna. It's a lot more user-friendly. It was designed a lot better. It's got a lot better search functions. You can do searches by a variety of different ways, by different genes, for example. You can also, they have a morph calculator, a genetics calculator, where you can put in the genotype of any 2 boas, and it will predict for you what the probability of offspring in the crosses will be. So that's especially useful if you have these multi-gene crosses. Another cool thing about Morph Market is that they have all the ads on there, even the ads of animals that have sold already. And I think this goes back to when the site was founded. So you can go back and, if you want to look at moonglow boas, You can see how many moon glow boas were available in each year. You can see which ones sold. You can see the price that they sold for. So it's a really good way of figuring out the value of a snake, both how much you should be paying for a snake, and if you're a breeder, how much you should be charging for your baby snakes. And it also will tell you how the value of the snake has held up over time. Of course, a lot of the morphs drop quite a bit in value, where a lot of the locality boas have been going up in value. Another nice thing with Morph Market is that you have the same functionality on a cell phone. So a lot of the other sites are really clunky to try to navigate on your mobile phone, but I think Morph Market was designed with mobile phone use in mind, so you can look at it on a mobile phone and it looks great. You have all the same functions. The one major disadvantage with Morph Market, though, as the name suggests, it's Morph Market, so it's predominantly morph boas. It's probably about 95% morph boas. There are some locality boas on there, and it seems like the percentage is increasing. So hopefully in time there'll be even more locality boa classifieds on morphmarket.com. Another place you can acquire a pet boa constrictor is at your local pet shop. So some pet shops do have boas, but typically they're not going to be a specific locality boa or a specific morph of boa. They'll have what is generally referred to as a normal or common boa, which often is a mix of different localities. So these boas can make fine pets, but generally speaking, you shouldn't be breeding animals like this that don't have a more defined ancestry. If you do buy a boa at a pet shop, make sure you talk to the owners about its history, where they got it, how much it's been eating, etc. Also, you want to make sure that it's healthy. Some people have more specialty reptile stores that have, they specialize just in reptiles. And some of these will have multiple different types of boas, including some morphs and some locality boas. But in general, the selection of boas, even at a specialty reptile shop, is going to be a lot less than what you'll see at many shows, and certainly what you'll see in the online classifieds. So that being said, you may want to consider buying a boa from a pet shop, but in general you're going to pay more money and there's going to be less of a selection, and there might also be some concerns about how the boa was kept. So make sure that you ask questions and you know exactly what you're getting. Another place to get boas for your collection is at the Reptile Shows. And in general, the Reptile Shows will probably have a lot more selection of boas than what you'll see at your local pet shop. However, they do seem to focus mostly on certain types of reptiles. I actually haven't been to a reptile show in a few years, but the last few ones that I went to, the vast majority of the breeders there, they worked with ball pythons and with different types of geckos. So if you're into ball pythons or geckos, that's great, but as far as boas, there really wasn't a whole lot. There were kind of a scattering of different locality boas and some of the more common morphs, but I didn't see any real specialized things there. This was at one of the mid-size regional shows. It wasn't one of the big national shows where you'll have more selection. But in general, there really wasn't a whole lot there. If you're just starting out, it can definitely be a good place to go. I wouldn't advise not to buy a snake from one of these shows. But just be sure that you know what you're getting. Be sure to talk to the breeder or the seller about the history of the boa, how it's been cared for, etc. And then I would say one of the most important things is to beware of mites, because there are a lot of mites at these shows, and you really have to take precautions to avoid becoming infested with mites. One more boa I thought I'd share with you. This is a 2015 holdback female Pacalpa Peruvian boa constrictor true redtail, one of my most beautiful boas in my collection. So the last place to get boas is to get them directly from a breeder. And with some of the rarer locality boas, there's only a few people in the whole world working with this specific locality. Same thing with some of the rarer morph boas. So if you want to get the particular animal, you may need to form a relationship with the breeder many years ahead of time. Often, for some of the rarer boas, the litters can be sold out years in advance. So it's a matter of patience to get these animals in your collection. So in order to find breeders, you can look at ads on the classifieds and you can see specific breeders that have produced the animals you're looking for in the past. You can also, of course, find a lot of breeders on Facebook and the different boa forums. And they'll typically show you pictures of boas that they've worked with and produced in the past. And this will give you a pretty good idea of what they might be producing down the line. So with some of the breeders, you can get your name put on a waiting list. And then if and when they have offspring available, they'll contact you in order to make a sale. In some cases, they may even require money to be on the waiting list, like a 10 or 20% deposit. And then you have to pay the balance when the baby is ready to go. Personally, I don't do waiting lists, and there's a number of reasons why. First of all, breeding boas is never a guarantee, and you can do everything right and still not get babies. So I don't want to promise somebody an animal that doesn't even exist yet. In addition, when I first started out, I actually did do a waiting list for some of my crosses. But what I found was that when the babies were finally ready, when I contacted the people almost never were still interested, and most of them I didn't even hear back from. So, I'd rather be spending my time with my boas than trying to reach out to people like that. And I made the decision that from now on, I'm not doing waiting lists. It's first come, first serve when the babies are available. One of the reasons I decided to do this YouTube channel was so that I could keep you guys posted on the status of all my breedings, and that I could give you updates about when babies are expected to be available. So if there's a particular animal that you're potentially interested in, please continue to watch these videos, and I'll give you status updates as soon as something has changed, and hopefully I have some babies on the ground. So that's a little bit about where you can acquire boas to add to your collection. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any comments or questions or anything to add, please, you can comment below or feel free to reach out to me. It's often tempting to think about what boas you'll add to your collection in a year or two down the road, or what potential pairings you might be having in 3 or 4 years' time. But remember to always enjoy your boas in the moment, and just appreciate the beautiful animals that they are, and how fortunate that we are to have these animals in our lives. Thanks for watching, and happy boas.